The Titan Prophecy. In 1898, 14 years before the most famous maritime disaster in history, a struggling American author named Morgan Robertson sat in his cramped New York apartment, wrestling with writer's block. What emerged from his imagination would become one of the most disturbing examples of fiction predicting reality with surgical precision. His novel, titled Futility, told the story of a massive passenger ship called the Titan, described as the largest vessel ever built and deemed practically unsinkable by its designers and the press. Robertson's fictional ship measured 800 feet in length, could carry 3,000 passengers, and boasted revolutionary safety features that made sinking supposedly impossible. The Titan was scheduled for an April crossing of the North Atlantic, traveling at 25 knots through ice-infested waters. In Robertson's story, the ship strikes an iceberg on the starboard side during a cold, calm night, tearing open multiple compartments below the waterline. The vessel sinks rapidly, and because the builders had such confidence in the ship's safety, they provided insufficient lifeboats for the passengers and crew. Over 2,000 people die in the freezing Atlantic waters. 14 years later, in April 1912, the RMS Titanic departed Southampton for New York on its maiden voyage. The ship measured 882 feet in length, could carry over 3,000 passengers, and was marketed as virtually unsinkable due to its advanced compartment design. On the night of April 14th, traveling at 22.5 knots through ice fields, the Titanic struck an iceberg on its starboard side. The impact opened multiple compartments, causing the ship to sink in less than 3 hours. Due to outdated safety regulations and overconfidence in the vessel's design, there were insufficient lifeboats. More than 1,500 people perished in the frigid North Atlantic. The parallels between Robertson's fiction and the real disaster extend beyond the basic facts. Both ships were considered marvels of engineering. Both were on their maiden voyages. Both struck ice at nearly identical speeds and angles, and both disasters occurred in April in the same region of the Atlantic Ocean. Even the names were eerily similar, with only one letter difference between Titan and Titanic. Robertson described his fictional passengers as wealthy elites traveling in luxury, which perfectly matched the Titanic's passenger manifest. The author even detailed how the insufficient lifeboat capacity would lead to class-based survival rates, with first-class passengers having better chances than those in steerage, exactly as occurred during the real sinking. When reporters tracked down Robertson after the Titanic disaster, he appeared genuinely disturbed by the accuracy of his predictions. He insisted he possessed no psychic abilities and claimed his story was based purely on his knowledge of shipbuilding and maritime conditions. Robertson explained that he had simply extrapolated current trends in ship design to their logical conclusion, predicting that larger and faster vessels would eventually encounter disasters that their safety systems couldn't handle. Yet this rational explanation struggles to account for the specific details that aligned so perfectly between fiction and reality. The presidential time twins. Abraham Lincoln and John Fitzgerald Kennedy lived lives that mirrored each other across exactly 1 century, creating a pattern of coincidences so mathematically precise that statisticians have struggled to calculate the odds. The synchronicities begin with their political careers and extend through their deaths, creating what appears to be history, repeating itself with supernatural accuracy. Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846, exactly 100 years before Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. Lincoln became president in 1860, Kennedy in 1960. Both men were deeply concerned with civil rights issues, though separated by a century of social progress. Lincoln faced the challenge of slavery and preserving the Union, while Kennedy confronted segregation and the modern civil rights movement. Both presidents were shot on a Friday, both in the head, both in the presence of their wives, and both died from their wounds. The parallels extend to their vice presidents, both of whom were named Johnson. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy, was born in 1908, exactly 100 years later. Both Johnsons were Democrats from the South who had previously served in the Senate. The men who assassinated the presidents also fit the pattern. John Wilkes Booth was born in 1838, while Lee Harvey Oswald was born in 1939, nearly maintaining the century gap. Even the locations of their deaths create an impossible coincidence. Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater, while Kennedy was shot while riding in a Ford Lincoln automobile. After shooting Lincoln, Booth fled to a warehouse and was captured in a barn. After shooting Kennedy, Oswald fled to a warehouse and was captured in a theater. Lincoln's secretary, whose name was Kennedy, had advised the president not to attend the theater that night. Kennedy's secretary, whose name was Lincoln, had advised the president not to make the trip to Dallas. The King's Identical Shadow. On July 28, 1900, King Umberto I of Italy visited the city of Monza for a gymnastics competition. That evening, feeling hungry, the king stopped at a small restaurant for dinner. When the restaurant owner approached his table to take the order, both men froze in astonishment. They were looking at what appeared to be their own reflection. The restaurant owner was also named Umberto, and the physical resemblance between the two men was so complete that observers described it as supernatural. As the evening progressed and the two Umbertos talked, the coincidences multiplied beyond the merely visual. Both men had been born on March 14, 1844, in the same city of Turin. Both had married women named Margherita on the same date, April 22, 1868. The restaurant owner had opened his establishment on the same day that Umberto became King of Italy. Both men had received military decorations for bravery during the same battles, and both had been present at identical public events throughout their lives, though they had never previously met. The king was fascinated by his doppelganger and invited the restaurant owner to attend the gymnastics competition the following day as his personal guest. They agreed to meet at the event to continue their conversation about their parallel lives. The next morning brought tragic news. The restaurant owner had been accidentally shot and killed while cleaning his hunting rifle. When informed of his double's death, King Umberto expressed profound sadness and decided to dedicate the day's athletic competition to his memory. That afternoon, as King Umberto arrived at the gymnastics competition, an anarchist named Gaetano Bresci stepped from the crowd and fired 3 shots from a revolver. The king died instantly. 2 identical men, who had lived parallel lives for 60 years, both died violently within 24 hours of discovering each other's existence. The mathematical impossibility of their shared characteristics, combined with their synchronized deaths, created a mystery that Italian authorities quietly suppressed to avoid encouraging superstitious beliefs among the population. The Richard Parker Parallel. In 1838, Edgar Allan Poe published his only complete novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. The story followed 4 survivors of a shipwreck who, facing starvation, drew lots to determine which of them would be killed and eaten by the others. The unlucky victim selected by chance was the cabin boy, a young man named Richard Parker. Poe's tale was pure fiction, a dark exploration of survival horror that pushed the boundaries of acceptable literature for its time. 46 years later, in July 1884, the yacht Mignonette foundered in the South Atlantic during a storm. 4 survivors managed to escape in a small lifeboat. Captain Tom Dudley, First Mate Edwin Stevens, Seaman Edmund Brooks, and 17-year-old cabin boy Richard Parker. After 19 days adrift without food, facing certain death from starvation, the three older men made a terrible decision. They killed and consumed the cabin boy to survive until rescue arrived. The real Richard Parker, like his fictional counterpart, was the youngest member of the crew and had no family connections to protect him. The circumstances of his death matched Poe's story with disturbing accuracy. In both cases, the decision was made by drawing lots, though in reality, this may have been a convenient fiction to justify the murder. The survivors were rescued after being spotted by a passing ship, and their story became one of the most famous legal cases in maritime history when they were tried for murder upon returning to England. The Comet's Companion. Samuel Langhorne Clemens, better known to the world as Mark Twain, entered this world on November 30th, 1835, just 2 weeks after Halley's Comet blazed across the night sky in its closest approach to Earth. From childhood, Twain felt an inexplicable connection to this celestial wanderer, often joking that the comet had delivered him to the planet like some cosmic stork. But as he aged and his literary fame grew, this childhood fancy evolved into something far more profound and unsettling. In 1909, with his health declining and his family largely gone, Twain made a prediction that stunned his friends and colleagues. He declared with absolute certainty that he would die during the comet's next return, exactly 75 years after his birth. "I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835, he told his biographer Albert Bigelow Paine. "It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it. It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with Halley's Comet. The Almighty has said, no doubt, now here are these two unaccountable freaks. They came in together. They must go out together." Friends and family dismissed this as typical Twain humor, his famous wit masking genuine fear of death. But Twain wasn't joking. He spoke with the conviction of a man who had glimpsed his own destiny written in the stars. As 1875 began and astronomers confirmed Halley's Comet was approaching its 75-year return, Twain's prediction took on an ominous weight. Throughout the early months of 1910, Twain's health deteriorated rapidly. He suffered from angina pectoris, a heart condition that left him increasingly frail and confined to his bed. As April approached and the comet grew brighter in the night sky, those close to Twain watched with growing unease as his prophecy seemed to be fulfilling itself. On April the 20th, 1910, Halley's Comet reached perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun and its brightest appearance in Earth's sky. The next day, April 21st, Samuel Clemens died peacefully at his home in Redding, Connecticut. He had arrived with the comet in 1835 and departed with its return in 1910, exactly as he had predicted. The mathematical precision of this cosmic synchronicity defied rational explanation. Halley's Comet follows a precise orbital period of approximately 75 to 76 years, and Twain's lifespan matched this celestial schedule with supernatural accuracy. The Jim Twin Mirror Lives. On August 19, 1939, identical twin boys were born in Ohio and immediately separated for adoption. Neither family knew of the other's existence, and both children were raised in complete isolation from their biological twin. By an impossible coincidence, both adoptive families chose to name their new sons James. For 39 years, these two boys lived parallel lives that would challenge everything scientists believed about nature versus nurture. James Lewis and James Springer grew up 300 miles apart, never knowing they had an identical twin somewhere in the world. Yet their lives unfolded like mirror images, creating a pattern of similarities so extensive that researchers would later struggle to explain how such synchronization was possible without any contact or shared environment. Both Jameses grew to be exactly 6 feet tall, and weighed exactly 180 pounds throughout their adult lives. As children, both had owned dogs named Toy. Both suffered from the same type of headaches beginning at age 18, experiencing identical symptoms at the same frequency. Both bit their nails compulsively and showed identical nervous habits when stressed. In their romantic lives, the parallels became even more striking. Both men first married women named Linda, and both marriages ended in divorce. Both then remarried women named Betty. Both had sons during their first marriages, and both chose to name their boys James Allen, though one spelled it Allen. Both drove light blue Chevrolet, and both smoked Salem cigarettes, consuming exactly the same number of packs per day. Their career paths followed identical trajectories. Both worked as part-time sheriff's deputies in their respective communities, both trained in law enforcement at similar times, and both eventually moved into security work for major corporations. Both served in identical military roles during their young adult years, and both received the same commendations for their service. Even their recreational activities aligned with mathematical precision. Both enjoyed stock car racing and both built identical workshops in their basements, using the same tools arranged in the same patterns. Both took family vacations to the same beach in Florida, staying at resorts within 3 blocks of each other in different years. Both preferred the same brand of beer, the same television programs, and both had developed the habit of leaving little love notes around the house for their wives to find. When the twins finally discovered each other's existence in 1979 through an adoption agency mix-up, researchers at the University of Minnesota immediately began studying their case. The Jim twins, as they became known, participated in extensive psychological and medical testing that revealed even deeper similarities. Their brainwave patterns were virtually identical, their blood pressure readings matched exactly, and they showed identical responses to psychological tests they had never taken before. Dr. Thomas Bouchard, who led the research team, described the Jim twins as the most remarkable case of separated identical twins ever documented. The scope and precision of their parallel lives exceeded anything that could be explained by genetics alone. Their story challenged fundamental assumptions about human development and raised disturbing questions about the nature of free will itself. The forgotten FDR prophecy. In 1923, a virtually unknown political cartoonist named Harold Wilson, working for a small New York newspaper, drew what he claimed was a vision of America's future president. The sketch depicted a man with a distinctive jawline, wire-rimmed glasses, and a cigarette holder clenched between his teeth at a characteristic angle. The figure sat in what appeared to be a wheelchair, though Wilson drew it subtly, suggesting disability without making it obvious. Most remarkably, Wilson labeled his drawing with the initials FDR. At the time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was serving as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, a relatively minor federal position that garnered little national attention. He had never been photographed with a cigarette holder, had not yet contracted polio, and showed no signs of presidential ambitions. Wilson's cartoon seemed to depict a man who didn't yet exist, predicting physical characteristics and mannerisms that Roosevelt wouldn't develop for several years. Wilson's drawing included disturbing details about future events that made no sense in 1923. The cartoon showed breadlines, closed banks, and crowds of unemployed workers, suggesting economic catastrophe during a period when America was experiencing unprecedented prosperity. Wilson drew public works projects, massive government construction programs, and federal job creation initiatives that contradicted everything politicians believed about limited government at the time. Most unnervingly, Wilson's cartoon included specific policy predictions that wouldn't become reality for over a decade. He drew Social Security cards, federal unemployment insurance, and government regulation of banking that seemed impossible given the political climate of the 1920s. Wilson even sketched radio broadcasts from the White House, showing a president speaking directly to citizens in their homes, a concept that wouldn't emerge until Roosevelt's fireside chats. When Wilson submitted his cartoon to his editor, it was rejected as too fantastical and politically impossible. The editor filed it away, and Wilson died in 1928, 5 years before Roosevelt became president. The cartoon was discovered in 1937 by a researcher studying newspaper archives, but by then Roosevelt's presidency had made Wilson's predictions seem like historical documentation rather than prophetic art. Government officials who examined Wilson's drawing were disturbed by its accuracy and quietly classified it to avoid encouraging supernatural beliefs during wartime. The cartoon remained buried in federal archives until historians rediscovered it decades later, noting that Wilson had somehow visualized not just Roosevelt's appearance and mannerisms, but his entire presidency with photographic precision. The London Death Loop. On March 17, 1974, Erskine Lawrence Eben was riding his moped through the streets of Hamilton, Bermuda, when a taxi struck and killed him instantly. The 17-year-old's death was ruled a tragic accident, the kind of random misfortune that occurs in cities worldwide every day. His family grieved, the taxi driver faced no charges, and life continued as it always does after sudden loss. Exactly 1 year later, on March 17, 1975, Erskine's identical twin brother Neville was riding the same moped along the same street at the same time of day. A taxi struck and killed him instantly, in precisely the same location where his brother had died 12 months earlier. The vehicle was the same taxi, driven by the same driver, carrying the same passenger who had been present during the first accident. Police investigators examining the scene found themselves documenting what appeared to be the same accident occurring twice. The impact patterns, the final position of the motorcycle, and the trajectory of the victim's body matched the previous year's incident with supernatural precision. Both brothers had been wearing identical clothing, both were traveling at the same speed, and both died from identical injuries sustained at the exact same angle of impact. The taxi driver, a man named Carlton Webster, was devastated by the impossible repetition. He had been driving professionally for over 20 years without a single serious accident, then killed identical twins in identical circumstances exactly 1 year apart. Webster insisted he had taken every precaution the second time, knowing the anniversary was approaching and feeling haunted by the previous year's tragedy. The passenger in the taxi, businessman Richard Pierce, confirmed the eerie similarity between the two accidents. Pierce had been making the same weekly business trip both times and recalled the first accident vividly. When the second collision occurred, he experienced what he described as déjà vu so intense, it felt like reliving the same moment twice. Every detail matched his memory perfectly, as if time had folded back on itself. Bermuda police quietly suppressed details of the case to avoid encouraging superstitious beliefs in the small island community. Official reports described the incidents as separate, unrelated accidents, though investigators privately admitted the duplication defied rational explanation. The mathematical odds of such precise repetition occurring by chance were so astronomical that statisticians refused to calculate them. The novel that foreshadowed 9/11. In 1994, best-selling author Tom Clancy published Debt of Honor, a political thriller that concluded with a scenario intelligence experts dismissed as unrealistic and impossible. Clancy's fictional terrorist, a Japanese airline pilot driven by revenge, hijacks a Boeing 747 loaded with fuel and deliberately crashes it into the United States Capitol building during a joint session of Congress. The attack kills the president, most of Congress, and the Supreme Court. decapitating the American government in a single coordinated strike. Clancy's detailed description of the attack included tactical elements that military advisors told him were too far-fetched for fiction. He wrote about terrorists using commercial aviation training, exploiting security vulnerabilities at airports, and turning passenger aircraft into guided missiles. Aviation security experts who reviewed the book insisted such an attack was impossible, citing multiple layers of protection that would prevent hijackers from gaining control of aircraft and using them as weapons. The author spent months researching his fictional scenario, interviewing pilots, security personnel, and government officials to understand how such an attack might theoretically be executed. His research revealed vulnerabilities in the aviation system that authorities preferred not to discuss publicly. Clancy incorporated these weaknesses into his novel, creating a blueprint for terrorism that officials hoped would remain purely fictional. 7 years later, on September 11, 2001, 19 terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airliners and executed attacks that matched Clancy's fictional scenario with disturbing accuracy. The hijackers had received flight training at American aviation schools, exploited known security vulnerabilities, and used passenger aircraft as guided missiles to attack symbolic targets. The World Trade Center and Pentagon strikes followed tactical patterns that Clancy had described in precise detail. Intelligence officials reviewing the attacks discovered that Clancy's novel had been found among the possessions of several terrorist operatives, suggesting that fiction had provided inspiration for reality. The book's detailed descriptions of pilot training, aircraft systems, and attack coordination appeared to have served as a tactical manual for the actual perpetrators. After September 11th, government agencies quietly removed Clancy's novel from recommended reading lists and discouraged public discussion of its prophetic accuracy. Officials worried that acknowledging how precisely fiction had predicted reality might encourage copycat attacks, or suggest that other thriller novels contained viable terrorist strategies. The Woman Who Remembered Another Life. In 1907, 3-year-old Dorothy Eady fell down a flight of stairs in her London home and was pronounced dead by the family doctor. An hour later, she suddenly awakened, but the child who opened her eyes was fundamentally different from the one who had fallen. Dorothy began speaking in a language no one recognized, drawing hieroglyphs on every available surface, and insisting with desperate conviction that she needed to go home to Egypt, a place she had never seen or heard mentioned. Her parents, devout Christians living in suburban London, were horrified when their daughter began worshiping ancient Egyptian gods and refusing to pray in church. Dorothy would cry inconsolably whenever she saw images of mummies in museums, claiming they were taking people away from their families. She drew detailed pictures of temples, gardens, and buildings that existed nowhere in children's books or popular culture of the time. By age 10, Dorothy had taught herself to read hieroglyphs using museum displays and archaeological texts that were far beyond her educational level. When Egyptologists examined her translations, they were stunned to find them completely accurate, including interpretations of obscure religious texts that only a handful of scholars worldwide could understand. Her knowledge extended to architectural details, religious ceremonies, and historical events that weren't documented in any sources available to the public. As Dorothy matured, her memories became more specific and disturbing. She claimed to have been a priestess named Bentreshit in the temple of Seti I during the 19th dynasty, over 3,000 years earlier. She described her previous life in extraordinary detail, including the layout of temple chambers, the names of other priests, daily rituals, and her eventual tragic death after falling in love with Pharaoh Seti and bearing his child, violating her sacred vows of celibacy. In 1933, at age 29, Dorothy finally traveled to Egypt and visited the Temple of Seti I at Abydos. Upon entering the ruins, she immediately began pointing out inaccuracies in the archaeological reconstructions. She identified the locations of gardens, pools, and chambers that had never been excavated, describing their contents and purposes with absolute confidence. When archaeologists tested her claims by excavating the areas she indicated, they discovered everything exactly as she had described. Dorothy's knowledge proved so comprehensive and accurate that the Egyptian Department of Antiquities hired her as a research assistant. Over the following decades, she guided numerous archaeological discoveries by identifying unexplored chambers, correcting translation errors in ancient texts, and providing insights into religious practices that had been lost to history. Her contributions to Egyptology were so significant that scholars privately admitted she understood ancient Egyptian civilization better than experts who had studied it their entire careers. The most disturbing aspect of Dorothy's case was the consistency and specificity of her memories. Unlike typical claims of past life recall, which tend to be vague and unverifiable, Dorothy provided detailed information that could be tested against archaeological evidence. Time and again, her memories proved accurate when physical evidence was uncovered to confirm her claims. She knew the exact locations of inscriptions hidden beneath centuries of sand, the purposes of rooms that archaeologists had misidentified, and the meanings of symbols that had baffled scholars. Egyptian authorities eventually became uncomfortable with Dorothy's uncanny knowledge and began restricting her access to sensitive archaeological sites. Officials worried that her abilities were attracting international attention to claims of reincarnation that contradicted both Islamic beliefs and scientific rationalism. Her research files were classified, and her most significant discoveries were attributed to other archaeologists to avoid crediting someone whose knowledge seemed to transcend normal human limitations. Dorothy lived in Egypt until her death in 1981, never wavering from her claims about her previous life as Bentrashit. She spent her final years working as a tour guide at the Temple of Seti, where visitors reported that she spoke about ancient events as if she had personally witnessed them. Egyptian archaeologists who worked with her privately acknowledged that her contributions to their field were invaluable, even if they couldn't publicly explain how she possessed such impossible knowledge. The case of Dorothy Eady represents one of the most thoroughly documented examples of claimed reincarnation in history. Unlike anecdotal reports that can't be verified, Dorothy provided specific, testable information that proved accurate when examined by experts. Her knowledge of ancient Egyptian civilization was so comprehensive and precise that it challenged conventional understanding of how human memory and consciousness operate. These 10 impossible coincidences reveal patterns that stretch the boundaries of rational explanation. From Robertson's prophetic novel to Dorothy Eady's ancient memories, from the Jim twins' parallel lives to Mark Twain's cosmic prediction, each case presents evidence that reality operates according to principles we don't yet understand. Whether these events represent glimpses into hidden dimensions of time, consciousness, and causality, or simply the inevitable result of statistical probability playing out across billions of human lives, they force us to confront the possibility that the universe is far stranger and more interconnected than we dare to imagine. The systematic suppression of these cases by authorities suggests that some truths are considered too disturbing for public consumption. When coincidences become so precise that they challenge our fundamental assumptions about how reality works, they threaten the ordered worldview that keeps society stable. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't why these impossible coincidences occur, but why those in power work so hard to keep them hidden from the rest of us. These 10 impossible coincidences reveal patterns that stretch the boundaries of rational explanation. From Robertson's prophetic novel to Dorothy Eady's ancient memories, from the Jim twins' parallel lives to Mark Twain's cosmic prediction, each case presents evidence that reality operates according to principles we don't yet understand. Whether these events represent glimpses into hidden dimensions of time, consciousness, and causality, or simply the inevitable result of statistical probability playing out across billions of human lives, they force us to confront the possibility that the universe is far stranger and more interconnected than we dare to imagine. The systematic suppression of these cases by authorities suggests that some truths are considered too disturbing for public consumption. When coincidences become so precise that they challenge our fundamental assumptions about how reality works, they threaten the ordered worldview that keeps society stable. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't why these impossible coincidences occur, but why those in power work so hard to keep them hidden from the rest of us. What unites these cases isn't just their mathematical impossibility, but the way they hint at forces operating beyond our current understanding. Time loops, parallel destinies, prophetic visions, and memories that transcend individual lifetimes all point toward a reality far more complex than the one we've been taught to accept. The evidence suggests that consciousness, time, and causality interact in ways that mainstream science refuses to acknowledge. The most disturbing aspect isn't the coincidences themselves, but the pattern of cover-ups that follows them. Government files disappear, research gets classified, witnesses face intimidation, and evidence vanishes into bureaucratic black holes. This coordinated suppression implies that certain knowledge is deemed too dangerous for public awareness, too destabilizing for social order. These hidden coincidences prove that the world we think we inhabit may be nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion, designed to keep us from discovering the true nature of reality itself.